Christine. Okay. Got a great little notification that said that the recording began. So that's exactly what I wanted. For those of you who don't know me, I think everybody on the call thus far does, but I'm Sean Gardner. I'm the project manager with Valley Food Partnership for this USDA Regional Food System Partnership grant. If you want more information about our project, you can find it at westslopefood.org. The purpose of these weekly meetings is to discuss and to develop a partnership and a plan to scale up and strengthen our regional food system. Between now and next March, we have three objectives. Number one, to form a collaborative partnership among regional food system stakeholders with shared vision, goals, and values. Number two, to plan the development of a digital system to optimize communication and collaboration and logistics among our regional food system partners. And number three, to create a regional food system plan that brings together the many projects that are currently underway and forming within our region. In the near future, we're going to be sending out a save the date for a forum on October 9th, somewhere probably in Montrose, to present a draft of our partnership agreement and the findings from our digital system research, which we'll be discussing today. Specifically today, we'll be discussing what incentives are necessary for producers to join a regional network, to share production information, and to collaborate. And here to guide us through this topic is Mitch Bennett. Mitch is a managing member of the Western Slope Food and Innovation Center, or as many of you know it as the previous Russell Stover's facility in Montrose. Mitch is also a data expert with decades of experience in data systems, and he's here to discuss the ways we're working to unravel this question about how to incentivize producers to share information and to collaborate. Mitch, perhaps you could turn your video on, introduce yourself, and help us to understand what we mean by incentives that for producers to join a regional network to share production information and collaborate.
Sure. Good morning, everybody, and welcome to the Holiday Inn in Montrose, where I'm now sitting. I think what I'm going to do today is one of the things that Sean and I have talked about is that, what is it that we're trying to do from the digital platform that we keep talking about? And I'm going to share with you kind of a screen real quickly and just kind of go through some slides. This was started about 5 years ago. Now it seems like it's been 5 years, but it's probably been closer to 4, where we were kind of looking at these new technologies called blockchain and how it's going to affect the family farm as we move forward. And we've been working on this for quite a long time. And one of the things that we've talked about this week is that, we're really down to what we're looking at as incentives. And I thought maybe it's appropriate I just kind of share with you a little bit of a highlight of what blockchain is, and then we can get into more specifics. So for those of you not familiar with blockchain, it's the new technology that drives Bitcoin. You hear all about cyber currency, but it's also the new technology that's driving all the future supply chains, all the food supply chains. So if you're Walmart or if you're Kroger and you're selling into those two big conglomerates, you're on their blockchain food system. They call it the IBM Food Trust System, but you actually are on that system. And this is what they're asking all their suppliers to go through. But, at a high level, blockchain really is just a distributed database. It's just a database that you can basically store information on. And once that information is entered, it's completely encrypted. It's secured and it can't be altered. So whoever the source of that originator of that data, once they put information onto the block, they're the only ones that can change it. And the nice thing about that is that once it's logged and it gets processed, it can be shared with anybody. So you can share the information with the third party or anybody that you want to share that information with. I'm not gonna get a lot of detail about the technology, but just think of it as just a digital technology that stores data. And that's the best way to look at it. When you start looking at how it works, right? I mean, everybody talks about Bitcoin. And when you look at the food supply systems, it sits right in that Bitcoin application layer. So Bitcoin is really just an application for cyber currency. And when we look at building out an alternative food supply system, we're saying we got to build the application that's going to sit on top of these blockchain protocols. And there's different protocols that you can go in with blockchains, but everything that you access is always through the internet. So it's always still going to be internet access into a blockchain. In that blockchain, you're going to have data. And then on top of that, the application that's going to pull that data out so you can actually use it. So that's kind of a high level. What I want to talk about a little bit, and what Sean and I have been talking about, when you look at the key attributes of blockchain, there's really 4, and I'm only going to talk a little bit about 2 of them. One is it's a peer-to-peer network, which means that this is the first time that we don't have to go through a central database. So we're all familiar with central databases because everything we do is a central database. You log into Google to get your email, you go into Facebook to look at your updates. That's a central database. Which that means is that everybody's coming into the same front door. I mean, so we all have our passwords, but we're all coming into the same front door. And then with that, it's a corporation, Facebook, that decides, okay, what information do you want to see? Who are your friends? How do we get, access to your friends? And that's what they call a centralized network. A blockchain is distributed, which is completely different. The blockchain basically says that all my data sits on my PC. And I get to decide who gets to share with it. And it goes back to, if you go way back when Napster started, if you remember, Napster was basically saying, hey, I've got all this music that I bought. It's on my PC. I listen to it every day and I want to share it with my friends. And oh, by the way, if you, log into my PC, you can look at all my albums and all my Mac records and I can share them with you. Well, Napster got shut down because of what? IP, privacy, trademarks, The artist said, hey, wait a minute, you can't just share my information on a digital format. So it got shut down because it was all based on laws that are out there. So when you look at blockchain, just know that it's a distributed architecture. It doesn't have a central focus. You are in control of your data. You're going to be controlling who's going to have access to your data. The big one that I want to talk about today is what they call the distributed ledger. What is a ledger? Well, a ledger is basically, if you look at accounting ledger, it's easy. It's debits and credits, right? It's my inputs and my outputs. It's my credits and then my debits. And that's basically what they call a ledger. It's an accounting ledger. But when you get into blockchain, now we're talking about what's that ledger? Well, that ledger is basically your to-do list, your task, what you do on a daily basis, right? How much you've planted, all the way down into what's the soil moisture today? What's the temperature? What's the plant information that you're writing down? And today, all that is done on a piece of paper that's put in a pocket. If you're sophisticated, it might be done on an Excel spreadsheet where you're keeping daily records of all your tasks and what you're doing on a daily basis, all the problems you're running into. So when you start looking at blockchain, it's the first time we can take that information, that production information, that operational information, and put it into a record that you control, that you can share. And that's what we want to talk about. If there was a record that you're doing on a daily basis and keeping track of your operations, what would you share with another party? We've been doing a lot of work right now looking at the foundational platform for blockchain, and we've really been focused on all the different regulations that we have to basically work on. Right now, we have to look at record keeping for who I am, for all my business licenses. I need to look at the federal laws that I have around FSMA. Am I keeping track of my food safety plans? Do I have all the records I need for that? If you're GAP or harmonized GAP, what are all the information I need from GAP? What are all the information I need to give to a third-party certifier that make me certified for my organic certification or my generative certification? But all that data basically is what we're looking at, is that we need to standardize so that once I enter it into my block that identifies who I am and all that information, I can freely share it with anybody that needs to have access to that by just giving them what we call a key. And think of a key as just basically a password. So if you're going to give me access into all of your records that you need for FSMA, you're just going to log in. I'm going to basically send you an email and saying, hey, log in here, which directs me to your PC. You put in that password, and that password will then open up that record, which is now going to be unencrypted, so you can see it, and you can see all my FSMA reports. So it's basically what we've been doing is looking at those requirements that we need for federal, state, and government regulations. And we're really we think we've got that pretty much nailed down now, that we understand what the standard data formats are going to be for all that information that needs to be shared. But now we're going to get down into, okay, what's the production information and what's the operational information that I want to share or I could share? And the best way to look at that, it's not like, okay, I've got this information, I want to share it. You got to look at it as what information do you as a producer, what do they need? If you could ask your neighbor a question and your neighbor could freely give you that information, what would that be? So if I'm looking at my crops or what I'm doing in my field, what is my neighbor down the road doing? Or what's my neighbor down the road, 8 miles doing? Has he seen anything with any diseases, any insects, any moisture? What's happening in his microclimate that I would love to know, because it's just going to help me improve my operations. And that could be sharely distributed and shared through a digital ledger. Like, I'll give you access to all of the records that I did today and what actions I took, if you give me all the access of all the records and all the actions you took today. And that's what we call a distributed ledger. It's the idea that I can share my information with my neighbor down the road to better improve both of our farms or both of our productions on our ranch. And one of the things that we've been trying to discuss is that if I'm looking at it from a standpoint, I'm going to share, the most important thing we need to look at is that what information do I need? Because if you need it, your neighbor needs it. So what's that information that would be very valuable to me if I had it? And then what's the incentive? And this gets back into what's the incentive? What's the incentive for me to share that information? I mean, is that, if I share that information, what's it going to do for my production? Is it going to help me with taking care of maybe a problem I have? Is it going to help me with getting a higher margin? Is it going to help me with getting a higher yield? We're trying to figure out what the incentives would be between individuals who share that information, right? And if you look at it from a standpoint of sharing information, then the idea that we're looking at is saying, okay, where's that data at? Because it's the information that I need, but there's data points that I need to draw from. And that data point might be, hey, can you tell me what your moisture in your soil is right now? Or can you tell me what your temperature of the ground is right now, or the air temperature right now? Because I'm trying to figure out what could happen to me within the next 24 hours or the next week. So there's a lot of information, data points that we can start collecting. If that information that you're asking for, like, hey, what's your environmental conditions today? What's your production look like? What's happening on your particular farm today? That's the information we're trying to try to assess and say, okay, how do I incent two individuals to say, hey, it's good for all in that unity and that collaboration we've been talking about. It's good for all of us. So right now, we're trying to figure out is that let's set aside all the information I might need to share for a third party for all my record keeping, but what is it that I want to share with my neighbor? And if I could share that information, if I get that information from my neighbor, what's that incentive? What's it do for me? And is there, and this is one of the things that we're going to be going down in the future, is there a monetary reward for sharing? And that gets into some of the stuff you'll see below called smart contracts and tokens, and how we can use tokens like a loyalty points. We're all familiar with loyalty points. I stay at the Holiday Inn here, I get loyalty points. I fly with United, I get loyalty points. Well, guess what? Those are what they call tokens. It's just a new word for a token. It's just a monetary value. There's a monetary value that can be traded. And we're trying to figure out if we can look at, here's the information I wish I could have on a daily, weekly, monthly, quarterly, annual basis. And if I can get that information, I get some kind of reward. And that reward could be some kind of a token that could have some kind of monetary value. That's still to be determined, but that's kind of what the vision is longer term. So today's discussion really was around, I need a distributed ledger and I've got this information. What can I share with my neighbors? And the reason for that is if you look at blockchain basically is now asking, and if you go to any one of the different blockchain networks that are being built for the supply chain, they're asking for that data. They want to know what the grower information is. So it's the idea behind, do I give that to a conglomerate, a big ag business who's going to ask me for, okay, what's your production data look like? What's your operation data look like? I'm willing to do that. But then the question we come back to, what's their incentive? What will they give me for sharing that information with them? And today there's not a model that's doing that. Today they're saying, hey, you want access to my network? You got to give the information. So it's more of a, if you don't give it, you don't get on my network. And we're trying to change that model a little bit. We can do that with FSMA because a lot of these big corporations need your FSMA information or your record keeping. And they're willing to pay for that because it helps them from administration expense reduction. So when we look at what's going on, I want to just pull up this slide because the reason for doing all this is because this is what your consumers demanding. And we always have to look at, we grow products, we raise animals for feeding consumers, and the consumers have high demands now, because one of the things that we've lost is trust. I mean, people want to understand, is the food that I'm basically eating, is it safe and is it clean? And how do I know that? And can you verify that? And more importantly, can I see where it was grown? And is there certifications that says it's organic? And then more importantly, is that where's the truth behind that product? Is it authentic? Is it healthy? Is it real? And that's basically what we're trying to figure out, is that we've got to look at the end customer, and the end customer is demanding this. And the question that we need to ask is that how we can give that information to them to make that consumer buying. So when we look at what we're trying to do, is we're basically building an alternative food network, and really a demand network. We're saying, hey, how do we get information to the consumer, our end consumer, and hopefully eliminate some of the middlemen in between? But really, this is all about data, and this is all about information. So, that's more to come on that one. But what we're trying to figure out is that if I was going to have this network, what information would I love to have from my neighbors or from the region that would help me with my production? That's it. I'm going to stop there.
So we have a few producers on the line. I'd be curious to know kind of what your take is on the question that's been posed by Mitch, and if you have any further questions to maybe give you a little bit more clarity about what it is that we're seeking. You can unmute yourself, or you can post in the chat, however you wish to participate.
Seems like some of the obvious needs. I mean, one is just comparative production rates for smaller producers or mid-sized producers, so that if mine's above or below, that would be really helpful, I think, to me. And certainly being aware on the demand side, what from a consumer side, what who needs what, and how can I get my product to the market quicker, and to whom. So I think those are two really obvious things that would be super helpful to be able to access quickly.
Thank you, Paul. Mitch, is that in line with kind of
exactly in line with what we're doing? I mean, one of the things that we've been looking at is all the different platforms that are out there. We're moving to, a platform society. So there's platforms, and everybody thinks that, oh, if I was on this CSA platform, or if I was using this platform, it's going to get me into new markets, and those new markets is going to give me the price points I'm looking for. And I just want to put that out. That's not true, because when you start looking at these platforms, they have expenses tied to them. And I'm trying to look at and assess, all these platforms that are out there, which one really provides the most value? And then what is that value? As you said, Paul, I mean, production rates is perfect, right? What's the production look like in the Western Slope region in the next 30, 60, 90 days? Because that's going to fluctuate, and that's also going to drive price point. Wouldn't it be nice to know today what it looks like?
Do we have any other producers that would like to share about what would they like to know if they had full visibility and knowledge of, what's going on within their region or from their neighbors? What information would be of value to you? Routt County Extension is asking, will you also ask about what assurances producers would need to feel comfortable using this technology? Mitch, would you like to respond to that?
I mean, here's the thing that's, this is a good example right now, is that when we start having these discussions, it's hard, because what blockchain is, it's all about data. And it really comes down to trusting. I mean, this is what blockchain, if you start getting into the details about blockchain, they call it the trust engine. And the reason for that is because once the information is entered by the originator, which could be the producer, it's theirs. They're the ones that are controlling it. So it gets back into, can you trust that information And do you trust the data that's being put in it? Most systems that, you know, you've heard garbage in, garbage out, that's how they're designed. There's a lot of garbage, but with the blockchain network, it's all about trust. And that trust is really more important than ever today, because, you know, who do you trust, right? If I can't trust my neighbor, who am I going to trust? So we're looking at it from a standpoint of saying that, you know, blockchain gives us the capability of entering real truthful information into a system that I then can decide who has access to it. And when I've had these meetings with, you know, producers over the last couple of years, it's the same thing. I don't know. I don't know if I can trust my neighbor with this information. I don't know if I can trust an organization with this information. I don't know what they're going to do with that information once I give it to them. And that's a big hurdle that we have to, it's a barrier right now to saying, how do I develop trust into those systems? Because today, most of those systems that are out there, you either trust the third party or the company that you're dealing with, because in some cases, you don't know what they're doing on the back end with all the information you're sharing. I mean, you look at what Facebook is and what, you know, Twitter is. I mean, we are their product. I mean, we provide them with information about us on a daily basis, and they monetize that information and use it. We don't know how they're using it. We don't even know what our profiles look like. So when we look at blockchain and we look at from an agricultural standpoint, the real question is still going to come down to, you know, how do I put trust and build trust into that system? And then when I share information, how do I know that that information is going to be used in the right way? And that gets back to, you know, our original goal is the collaboration model when it comes to governance rules. What are the rules around access? What are the rules around data usage? What's the rules around if someone's abusing the system and using information inappropriately? How can I knock them off? The nice thing about the blockchain network is that you're the one controlling who has access to the information, and you're the one that's going to know how that information is being used. So what we're looking at is, you know, take it once beyond, is that how do I put that information into a block? But more importantly, how do I wrap that around an intellectual property asset, a digital asset that you control? And that's really the vision that we have, is that the information that's going to be shared in any blockchain is going to become a digital asset that you actually control, and that becomes your intellectual property.
Mitch,
So,
can you explain how the loyalty points, the tokens would work? That seems like one of the incentives that is valuable beyond the actual data.
well, you're going to hear a lot about all these different cyber currencies that are out there, right? And there's like 2,600 of them, right? Bitcoin is the biggest one. And people spend a lot of time on that, and Ethereum. But when you look at all those other ones, they're really just, you know, they're not tied to any physical asset. So what are they, right? So, you know, you're basically looking at taking right now what we call loyalty points, and everybody's used to loyalty points, and trying to tokenize those so there's a value against that token. And that's kind of what we're doing. And what blockchain does, it's really the first time that we actually have an accounting ledger of that, right? As an example, I start sharing information with my neighbors. I know the information I'm sharing because it's in a ledger, because I see them logging in to my information, and I'm logging into their information, and we're consolidating information. And basically that gets down into that record now has value. And then the question is that if I have a whole bunch of people adding information to that record, does that value have some kind of token value to it? To who? Who's willing to buy it?
So, for example, I guess, Mitch, I mean, I'm working at an orchard right now. We're conducting soil, leaf, and pest tests all the time. And we're forming cultivation strategies according to the data that we gather. Is that something you're saying we could tokenize somehow and make available to our neighboring orchards? And they could, maybe if they had interest in seeing that data from our orchard, we could share it with them and they could pay for it?
Yes, that's what I'm saying. I'm saying is that you've got a lot of information that you're collecting that has value, and the value that you're going to put on that data. In some cases, you're going to say, hey, for my neighboring farmers, or that, you know, are close, because we all are kind of a small ecosystem, I'm going to give that information free. I'm going to give it to you, but you need to be reciprocal. I want to know what's happening on your farm too. Now, when you go outside, say, of where you're growing down in the Gunnison Valley, and someone, say in Denver in the Front Range, wants to see your data, there should be a value set to that.
Okay.
You get to set that value.
Recently selling our cherries, I was informed as well that we can get a, premium value if we can demonstrate, that we've maintained the cold chain in certain ways, like if we've hydro cooled our cherries and then gotten them into cold storage and all that kind of stuff. And so that would all be, I guess, data that we could somehow capture, record, and show verification of, and thus prove to obtain a more premium value for our cherries. Is that another example of tokenized data that we can sell?
Yes, I mean, that's a perfect example because it's the cold chain data and it's also part of FSMA, right? There's rules around that. So the question is going to be that, what's that value? What's the value of you sharing that information? But then from a data perspective, how do I verify and authenticate that? How are you going to verify that? What are you going to do? Are you going to take pictures of you dumping your cherries into a cold bath and then timestamp that picture and put it on there? Are you going to basically show me a temperature reading of your cold storage unit that you put it in? Are you going to give me the data that says I picked at this time and it was only in the field for 4 hours and I got it into the cold storage within 3.5 hours? So the question from a data perspective is, how do I verify that? And if you can verify that, then you've got value. And with that value, then you can share that. And then you can determine what kind of monetary value that has. And it could just be a barter. It doesn't have to be, cash. That's why, the nice thing about when you look at tokens and you look at loyalty points, they really don't have any value, right? They have value if you go back to the Holiday Inn like I do and use them, right?
Yeah. Well, in this particular example, I mean, it would just buy us the verification necessary to get that premium buyer.
Correct.
I mean, I think one of the requirements, some of them, is that we got to probe the fruit and actually take an internal temperature of the fruit. So, I mean, I guess we would take like a picture of that and be able to, upload that, and it just be a part of our verification record to that buyer.
That's one way to collect the data. I mean, you could put a temperature gauge and take a picture of it on your cell phone, and the cell phone then timestamps it. It does a GIS code, so I know you're actually standing there, and it becomes a valid record then.
Okay. Well, what other questions does some of you have out there, especially any of you that are producers or work with producers? I guess another question that comes to mind for me, Mitch, is that, here we're working on a project for a regional food system partnership. And so in order to kind of, increase the production, and trade of food within our region so that we can increase the amount of food that we're consuming from our region, almost achieve some sort of level of import substitution where we're not, bringing in so much food from outside our region, but we're growing more food in our region to consume within our region. How does this all relate to that? I mean, how does talking about how to incentivize producers to share information in a network within a region and finding ways that they can monetize and tokenize, the exchange of information, how does that relate to us achieving also the information we need to be able to build a network within a region to maybe like coordinate marketing and crop production with demand planning or inventory management, things like that?
I mean, that's a great question. What we're looking at is that we first need to find out what's the origin of the data, where does it reside, and then how valuable is that data to a third party. And I think that's, Sean, what we're trying to get down to a level that says, hey, right now there's a lot of platforms out there that are going to say, hey, if you give me this information, you're going to do whatever, right? Going to give you new market channels. I'm going to give you a different price point. We're kind of taking the approach of saying, but what is it that has value to the producers? I mean, what is it that would help me on a daily basis if I had this information? And where is that information? Where does it reside? And today we're going to find out it's nowhere. So it's kind of like, Greenfield that says, hey, if I was going to use this information, or if I had access to this information, how would I use it? And we don't know that yet. So one of the things that we're doing with our grant, right, is we're basically doing an assessment grant, right? It's planning and assessment, We're not to the implementation yet. We're trying to get all the information we can. I call it, I'm writing a spec, and that specification is going to say, if I had a clean piece of paper, a green field, what would I build? And what tools do I need in my digital tool chest that's going to help me on a daily basis in the production and the operation of my farm? What's the information I need? And today, we don't have that. And that's the reason that we're having these, the grant is to say, okay, what is it? What's that spec look like? What would the vision look like? What do I need? Because, the biggest hurdle we have that we're going to have to talk about is the education. What is it? Right? No one wants to be a data entry clerk.
Right.
So we have to figure out what data has the most value. And it could be, to your point, guess what? I have my cold storage information, part of my cold storage chain that a third party really wants to have access to. And that could be the lynch or the link to start something really cool, right? Something that we can expand into. We're trying to figure out, what is that link? What's that first link we have? The record keeping, we know from a government perspective what we have to do, even for our certification requirements, right? But the real question that we're focused on is that, what is the production operation data that would be helpful amongst the small group of regional producers that would really benefit them as a whole?
Mitch, what would the initial cost be for a producer in such a network? Like, I mean, what would it take for them to get onboarded and participate and start sharing information, start capturing, recording, and sharing?
Well, that gets back to the business model, right? I mean, if you look at the models that are out there today, to get access into a network, it's free. I mean, we get our email from Google. We're not paying for our email services, right? But they're taking all of my information and using that and tracking me when I go on the internet, right? The question you're going to ask then is that, well, if it's free, then what am I going to be giving up? Am I giving up the rights to my data? Because that's basically what you're doing when you log into Facebook and Google and any platform today. You're giving up rights to your information because they're monetizing it, and that's how they make their money. Let's be frank, right? So the real question is, if we're not going to be utilizing and you have control of your data and you don't want it to be monetized, then there has to be some kind of cost recovery, because infrastructure expensive. It's expensive to have a network. It's expensive to have programmers and expensive to have data analysts. These are expensive programs. That's why you see a lot of the, platforms that are out there, marketplace platforms, the CSAs or, any other platform, they charge you a monthly fee. So, I mean, there's a monthly fee that will probably be a subscription fee for basic services, and basic services just could be the private network that we want to put together so we can share information, and we know who that information we're sharing it with, who that individual, that party is. I mean, so that could just be a secured private network that says, hey, I know that information I'm sharing is private, and I know the individuals that I'm sharing it with because I've given them access to my information through private keys.
Okay, so you have this monthly cost to participate, and that's one of the reasons why we're working to discover what are the incentives, what would be of value to producers to get information from the regional network, so that they would be able to do, if you will, a cost benefit analysis.
Right.
I paid this much monthly fee, but I get this information that I previously did not have access to.
Exactly.
Okay. I mean, it seems like we got to reach, certain economies of scale for this to really have much value to producers, right? I mean, we got to get a lot of producers participating at one time initially for there to be an inventory of, valuable data. Would that be true too?
Well, I mean, you brought up let's use your example on the cold chains information that you have. The question you said is that you ran into a point, you get a higher price point if you could share that information with a third party. Well, the question is, who are those third parties that are willing to pay for that? Are they all willing to pay for that? Anybody you sell cherries to and you say, hey, oh, by the way, I can give you my cold storage data. Will they pay you a premium for that? So they're the ones that you also have to look at, because they're the ones that also could build out the infrastructure or pay not only you, but that could be just an added value service that, you're giving that information, but it's, it helps everybody.
So the demand side is also a
Critical.
possible source of capitalizing this.
It's critical. I mean, if you're
Yeah.
going to sell into a major retailer these days and they're going to ask you to get on their blockchain network because they're going to know all your information because they have a right to know for recall purposes, right? The
Mhm.
question you have to ask is saying, hey, you're asking me to put all this information into this new system that you have. How are you going to incent me? What's my incentive to give you that information? And in a lot of cases, they're willing to pay you for that because it helps them significantly from administration expense. You know, how valuable is your FSMA records? How valuable is your cold storage records? How valuable is your moisture records? We haven't had anybody sit down and talk about the value prop for all these different, this information set that we're being asked to provide. And it's time we start doing that. I mean, your digital assets are something that we need to think about because they're valuable, not only to yourself, but to your neighbors and to the community.
I know we have a couple of producers out there and we get some other people. I really want to hear what people's kind of impressions are here and be honest, just like tell me what you're all thinking out there. Please feel free to unmute yourself, be brave, speak up and tell us what you're thinking.
Hey, Sean, this is Margaret McRoberts. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can. Go ahead, Margaret.
Perfect. I just want to say that I think it's very interesting. As I have said to Mitch before, I don't come from the technical background, but it all makes so much sense how the data that we're sharing is free and being used, and you can see it over and over again where something will autofill on your phone or your computer, and you know that people have access to this data, and thinking about a way to easily share what's happening, particularly even if you look at climate change impacts and you see different things changing, you can start to use that data to analyze it in a more holistic, systematic way. And then I think also too, building off of the question that you proposed about how do we start to share information and work together collaboratively as a regional food system so that we can start to be stronger and more resilient. And as I've already spoken to Mitch, that seems critical, figuring out how we can share the data, how we can operate and talk to one another on IT platforms. And like you said, once again, make sure that we have that privacy information. And like you said, going back to making sure we're collecting the right information. And then I would say too, heading back to really finding a way so it's easy for producers and aggregators, anybody in that system that isn't necessarily focused on wanting to enter data on a daily basis, but needs to in many ways. How can we make that simple, intuitive, and structured in a way that it's not adding more? Those are my 2 cents. And thanks for the presentation.
Yeah, Mitch, maybe you could explain too, like, I mean, once we get presumably producers to see the value of recording and sharing their data with each other, who's the agent or the group that would then access aggregate data to achieve kind of regional food system objectives of optimizing transportation and distribution for efficiencies in logistics and things like that? How would that work, like in accessing that information from producers?
Well, I think we've had a couple conversations about how we need to put together some type of cooperative, right? It's they call it a platform cooperative is the new terms, where the information that's being collected, the information that's being shared is all being controlled by the producers. So the information that's being entered is all basically being controlled by a cooperative of producers that are part of a membership. And they decide what the rules are, right? Now, when you start getting into what's the network, now you're getting into the expense around IT networks, right? How do I access information? How's the information formatted? How's the information shared? How's it aggregated? What's the reporting look like? I mean, that gets into, there's got to be a third party involved that's going to have to manage that information. And then that party also will then be that entity used for security, right? How do I protect my data? How do I protect my assets? How do I protect, people having access to information that, they shouldn't have access to? So there's a lot of different technologies that are out there and things that we keep talking about. This is all basic information or platforms that are out there today. I mean, so this isn't new. This is technology. It's there. We talked, briefly about how do I collect information. There's many mobile applications that will do that right now. So the mobile applications that you can have, your phone is really a mini computer right now. If you can take a picture of something and you can have it GIS'd and also then time-stamped, I mean, that becomes a valid record, right? So your mobile phone could be your input device, right? And then you tie in IoT devices on top of that. Just a gauge on your temperature, cold storage is all you need, right? Can I read that every hour, every day to make sure your cold storage facility has got the right temperature at? So the tools are out there. So we got to look at this as being like a digital tool set. What are the tools that I need to put in my chest? So if I have a tool chest, what are the digital tools that I need? And every single producer is going to be different. And we're trying to figure out, okay, what's the commonalities though? What are the commonalities that we're all going to be working on? And I break it down into 3 areas. One is that, I need to know who you are, your ID. Who are you, right? Not only who you are, but where you live. And if you start having more information, like you can put into your block around your lot lines, your fenced rows, your farm gate, what you have, and it's just valuable information that's basically you put into it identifies who you are. And then you start taking pictures of drones and you've got a picture of your field now. That's a new data set. I mean, that's valuable. That adds value to your asset, which is your land. If you can have a drone give you a image of what you currently have in your field as far as your acreage and your water and your moisture and all the coverage that you currently have, that's valuable data sets that you can actually then can use. So the question that you're asking is that I look at this as being more of a cooperative, that we got to bring people together, and those people need to unite around standard governance rules. And then you're going to have a third party that's going to be your party that's saying, hey, we need you to manage our data for us. We need you to manage the infrastructure, the network, the security, and then protecting my digital assets. There's going to be a third party has to do that for you.
Okay. But just to kind of bring it back around to where we began this conversation, we've defined like the compliance data that we need across the board. What we're looking at now is information of value that producers can trade among themselves, or that value chain stakeholders can trade among themselves. And all of this is to determine what constitutes the standard data sets that are going to go into that they can be filled out by anybody. Sort of like, I guess, like we do with TurboTax, right?
Right.
TurboTax has figured out like what are all the standard data fields that everybody has to, that has to be available for everybody to fill out to do their taxes. And we're doing something similar with regard to all the information or data that we would want to share within a regional food system. Is that correct?
That's correct. I mean, we've been working really hard on understanding how to do there's 3 sets of data I'm looking at. How do I identify you? I mean, that's one that we've looked at. And when I identify you, that's where all your compliances come in place, right? Here's your FSMA, here's your certifications, here's your business records, here's your licenses. That all can be put into a bucket. I'm just saying that's who you are. That's your identity. What we're working on now is the other 2, which is that, okay, what's the production data, right? What do you produce? How do you produce it? What makes your microclimate that you're producing in better than the guy down in the front range? And then on top of that, then I'm going to get into what's your operational data? What actions are you taking? What do you do on a daily basis? That's kind of like your to-do list, your task list, your chores list, right? What is it that you do on a daily basis? And then how does that compare with what your neighbor does, or how does that compare with what they're doing in the Western Slope region compared to the Front Range, compared to anybody? How does all that compare? Because we're all doing the same thing. I mean, we're all growing something or raising something, but we all do it differently and uniquely based on our microclimate. Well, what's the difference in the microclimates? And how can we start predicting then? And how can we use more demand forecasting that we've talked about briefly, right? So the ID stuff we've got, it's the production operation data. we're trying to figure out is saying, what is it that we need to share? And I don't want to look at it as what do we need to share. I kind of look at it as what do I need to be better at what I do? What information on a daily basis would really help me make my daily decisions?
Okay. Yeah, by way of analogy, sometimes I think about this in terms of the similarities it has with biological systems. People that are growers understand these systems. They work with them all the time, and they're always trying to put elements within their system into the most optimum symbiotic relationship with each other. That they're always trying to work with the soil and the water and the plants and the animals and structure their systems, in alignment with the patterns of nature to optimize the production and the yield and the health and the sustainability of their farm or ranch operation. And in a similar way, that's kind of what we're trying to do with information that's being shared among producers within a region, right? We're trying to optimize the relationships in the exchange of resources between those different producers so that we can get the best return out of our region that's possible. And then that data and that sharing of resources and information sets us up for having the capability of then really aggregating the supply to meet the aggregate demand within our region. Did I say that all well, Mitch? Is that?
But I think one of the key points you made is that how do I compare and who am I comparing against? Am I
Mm-hmm.
comparing against myself based on last year's results? Am I comparing myself around my neighbor? Am I comparing myself around what I see in the region? What's my comparison? So how do I compare is one, and then you talk about pattern recognition. Well, what are the patterns? So we have to look at it from a standpoint, if I am going to start comparing, what am I comparing against? I mean, in certain industries, and I'll just use the automotive industry because I'm familiar with that. They have, if you're a franchise car dealer, you're immediately put in what they call a 20 group. And that 20 group basically meets every quarter and they share all their financial records. Now that 20 group isn't someone that's in your city, it's someone that's outside your region, but it's still selling, Cadillacs or still selling Chevrolets. They're still part of that franchise. And they get together once a quarter for 2 days and analyze each other's financial statements and talk about what they need to do to make improvements. Who did this experiment? How did that work? And they share all that information within their 20 group, and it's very well protected, but it helps them all, right? We don't have that type of 20 group organizations within our farming community, right? We've got lots of great associations, and I think they're doing a really good job, but we're not doing, what are we doing to compare? What are we comparing against? Ourselves or others? And if you're going to compare against others, are they in the same predicament? They doing the same crops, same microclimates, the same production, right? That gets into, carry capacity and all that good stuff. But that's what we're trying to do, is saying, if I was going to start comparing, what are the 20 things that I want to compare my operation with someone else? And what would be those 20 things?
I want to reiterate that I understand that we're at this place of discovering the value to producers and trying to unpack that and clarify that, because if we're ever to have a regional food system where we can really optimize the efficiencies of logistics, of trade within a region, we've got to get information from the producers. But producers are only going to make the investment of time and effort and monetary investment into sharing that information if there's some kind of a benefit to them, right? If there's some kind of and so that's what we're trying to understand, is what would benefit them, what information would help them, and give them value. And that's our way in to getting them to start participating in a sharing network. Is that correct, Mitch?
Yeah, that's correct. I mean, today's discussion was really just throwing it out there as ideas to have people kind of think about. We don't have an answer. We're going to find an answer. We're going to find a solution. And I think today was more, let's talk about it so that we all are on the same page as far as what we're trying to discover and uncover, and we don't know that yet. I mean, you brought up a good example when you used your cold storage, right? Is that applied to everybody in the region or just to your operation? I don't know, right? You said that has value to you. You found it has value to you. What kind of value? What kind of monetary value is that? Is that 2 or 3 pennies more per pound?
Yeah. I mean, another example is we just bought 200 beehives, and they require sufficient flow or nectar to produce their honey. And if they don't have that on our farm, we either need to move them or get them from a neighboring farm. And so it would be valuable for me to know, like, what cover crops our neighbors are using and how much of it's in bloom at any given time. We had to mow 4 acres of our in our cherry block to be able to harvest the cherries, and that took 4 acres of nectar out of availability to our bees. But could they pick that up at the neighboring farm? I mean, I would be interested. That's maybe too simple of an example, I suppose, because we could just go over and call or find out from our neighbor. But if we had the capability of like planning with our neighbor that nectar flow, we wouldn't have to like produce syrup and feed our bees and lose money.
Another great example.
Yeah. Well, we're getting near the end of our time. I just wanted to kind of give everybody last opportunity to share thoughts or questions. Please feel free to unmute yourself, and then we'll take final thoughts and questions, and then we'll wrap up. If there are no further thoughts or questions, we can just wrap it up now. Feel free to reach out to me by email at sean@valleyfoodpartnership.org. If you have any questions or give me a call, you can always call me. It's probably the best way to reach me these days, 970-712-0950. You can find my information on our website, westslopefood.org, and feel free to reach out anytime. If there's no further questions, we'll go ahead and wrap it up. And it doesn't appear that there are. Nobody's chatting and nobody's unmuting. So thank you all for joining us today, and have a great day. Thank you.